Do you think about those African American dishes you'll never see again? They once filled Sunday tables, church suppers, and family reunions with flavors that carried our history in every bite. What happens when the taste of a tradition fades for good? Burgu stew was the kind of dish that brought entire communities together, a pot simmering for hours over an open fire or on the stove, brimming with whatever meats were on hand, often rabbit, squirrel, venison, or chicken, along with an abundance of vegetables. The slow cooking transformed even the toughest cuts into tender bites, while the medley of spices created a deep, savory aroma that could carry across a whole neighborhood. This was not a dish you made for just a few people. It was meant for gatherings, with ladles dipping into the pot to fill bowls all afternoon. The flavor changed from cook to cook, with no two burgus exactly the same, yet all shared the same comforting heartiness. In African American communities, burgu was more than food. It was fellowship, a meal that turned whatever was available into something worth celebrating. Today, the labor and time required mean you rarely see it outside of historical reenactments or special heritage festivals, but for those who grew up with it, the memory of that thick, meaty stew still feels like a warm handshake from the past. Corn pone was humble, but it held a steady place on the tables of African American households, particularly in rural areas where cornmeal was a pantry constant. Unlike cornbread, corn pone was made without leavening, giving it a denser, heartier texture. It could be shaped into patties or baked as a single cake, cooked in cast iron for a crisp outer layer and tender interior. The flavor was simple, with just cornmeal, water, salt, and sometimes a touch of fat, but its versatility was unmatched. Served alongside greens, stews, or beans, it soaked up juices beautifully, turning every bite into a full, satisfying mouthful. Because it did not require expensive ingredients, it was an accessible staple for families stretching their resources. Over time, as tastes shifted toward fluffier breads and store-bought loaves, corn pone began to fade from everyday life. Yet its legacy remains in the memories of those who remember the sound of sizzling batter hitting hot iron and the comfort of breaking off a warm piece to enjoy with the evening meal. Perloo rice with chicken gizzards was a flavorful one-pot meal rooted in the Gullah Geechee tradition, where rice dishes became a canvas for whatever proteins were available. Using chicken gizzards, a part of the bird often overlooked, meant that this dish was both economical and rich in taste. The gizzards were simmered until tender, their savory juices seeping into the rice as it cooked with onions, bell peppers, and a carefully balanced mix of spices. The result was a dish where every grain carried depth, and the texture of the gizzards offered a pleasant chew that paired perfectly with the soft rice. Perloo was a communal food, easy to prepare in large quantities and perfect for feeding extended families or church gatherings. While variations still exist, the gizzard version has nearly disappeared, replaced by recipes using pricier cuts of meat or boneless chicken for convenience. Its decline speaks to a broader loss of the resourceful cooking methods that once made inexpensive ingredients shine in dishes that felt anything but cheap. Sorghum molasses bread was a dense, hearty, quick bread that carried the earthy sweetness of sorghum, a staple sweetener before refined sugar became widely affordable. Made with whole grains and enriched by the dark, complex flavor of sorghum syrup, it had a rich aroma that filled the kitchen as it baked. The bread was not overly sweet. Instead, it struck a balance between savory and mellow, making it ideal for spreading with butter or pairing with soups and stews. Sorghum was prized not just for its taste, but also for its nutritional value, offering minerals and a robust flavor profile that sugar could never match. Families in rural African American communities often grew and processed sorghum themselves, turning it into syrup during seasonal harvests. Over time, as industrial sugar production lowered prices and palates shifted toward lighter, sweeter breads, sorghum molasses bread became less common. Today, it survives mainly in historical cookbooks and heritage baking demonstrations, a reminder of a time when flavor came from the land and every bite told a story of resilience and resourcefulness. Skillet fried salt mackerel was once a breakfast or supper favorite, especially in coastal and rural communities where preserving fish through salting was essential. The mackerel, heavily salted for storage, was soaked in water to draw out some of the salt, then dredged lightly in flour and fried in a skillet until crisp on the outside and tender inside. Served with sliced onions and a side of grits, it offered a briny, savory punch that paired perfectly with buttery cornmeal porridge. Its bold flavor meant a little went a long way, making it ideal for feeding families without breaking the budget. Because it was preserved, salt mackerel could be shipped inland and kept for long periods, making it a dependable protein source. As refrigeration became commonplace and fresh fish more widely available, the appeal of salted varieties waned. Today, skillet fried salt mackerel is a rarity, remembered fondly by those who grew up with it as a staple of their morning or evening meals, connecting them to an era of necessity-driven culinary creativity. Red gravy over rice was a beloved comfort food, simple yet deeply flavorful, built from humble ingredients. The gravy began with a base of tomatoes simmered with onions, peppers, and seasonings, often enriched with bits of smoked sausage, ham hock, or other cured meats. This slow cooking melded the smoky richness of the meat with the tang of the tomatoes, creating a sauce that was both hearty and comforting. Served generously over a mound of white rice, it transformed a plain grain into a meal that could satisfy even the hungriest family members. Red gravy was flexible. If meat was scarce, beans or vegetables could stand in, and the result was still delicious. Its warmth and depth made it a fixture on dinner tables, particularly in the South, where rice-based meals were central. Over time, changing tastes and the decline of home cooking pushed red gravy to the sidelines, leaving behind only scattered family recipes and memories of ladles pouring thick, fragrant sauce over steaming bowls of rice on quiet weeknights. Goober pea soup, a peanut-based dish inspired by West African groundnut stews, was a rich, nutty soup that carried deep cultural significance. Roasted peanuts were ground into a paste and combined with broth, vegetables, and seasonings to create a silky, flavorful base. Sometimes bits of meat or smoked fish were added for additional depth, but the peanuts were always the star. The creamy texture and savory sweet flavor made it unlike any other soup, comforting and satisfying in equal measure. It was a dish that connected African American kitchens to ancestral traditions, adapting old-world flavors to the ingredients available in the American South. Goober pea soup was also affordable, as peanuts were easy to grow or buy in bulk, making it a reliable option for lean times. Despite its history, the dish has largely disappeared from modern menus, overshadowed by more familiar soups and stews. Yet for those who have tasted it, the memory of its warm, peanut-rich broth remains tied to a sense of heritage and home. Baked coquina clams were a coastal delicacy, small but full of sweet, briny flavor. Gathered by hand along sandy shores, these tiny clams were rinsed clean, then baked with breadcrumbs, herbs, and butter until their shells popped open. The result was a bite-sized taste of the ocean, often served as a special treat rather than an everyday meal. In African American fishing communities, coquina clams were plentiful and free for the taking, making them a beloved part of seaside life. Preparing them was labor-intensive, but the reward was a pan of golden, aromatic clams ready to be enjoyed straight from the shell. Over time, as shorelines changed and coastal harvesting declined, coquina clams became harder to find in abundance. Today, few people even know they are edible, and the tradition of baking them for family gatherings has nearly vanished, surviving only in the stories of those who grew up with the sound of waves and the smell of seafood mingling in the air. Batter-fried green tomatoes offered a tangy, crispy bite that could brighten any plate. Firm, unripe tomatoes were sliced thick, dipped in a seasoned cornmeal batter, and fried in hot oil until golden brown. The outside was crunchy, while the inside stayed juicy and tart, creating a perfect contrast of textures and flavors. This dish was a clever way to use tomatoes before they ripened, ensuring nothing went to waste. In African American kitchens, it was often paired with fresh greens, fried fish, or simply eaten as a snack with a sprinkle of salt. While green tomatoes are still around, the traditional cornmeal batter frying method has become less common, replaced by faster or lighter cooking styles. The original version carried a rustic charm that spoke of summer gardens, front porch conversations, and the resourcefulness of cooks who could turn unripe produce into something truly memorable. It is a taste that, once experienced, is not easily forgotten, even if it has faded from regular rotation. Sheephead soup was once a rural staple, a dish that left no part of the animal unused. The head of the sheep was boiled slowly to release its rich, gelatinous broth, flavored with onions, root vegetables, and herbs. The meat, tender from the long cooking process, was picked from the skull and returned to the soup, adding both texture and flavor. It was a hearty, warming meal that could sustain a family through cold weather, making use of inexpensive cuts that would otherwise be discarded. Preparing it was not for the faint of heart, but those who grew up with it knew its taste was worth the effort. Over time, as butchering practices changed and access to prime cuts became easier, sheephead soup fell out of favor. Today, it is rarely made outside of heritage cooking events, but it remains a powerful reminder of a time when thrift, ingenuity, and respect for the whole animal shaped the meals that came to the table. Molasses custard pie was a dessert born from necessity, turning humble pantry ingredients into something elegant enough for Sunday dinners. The filling was a smooth mixture of molasses, eggs, and milk, with a pinch of nutmeg or cinnamon for warmth, poured into a simple crust and baked until set. Its deep, caramel-like sweetness came from molasses, which was once more affordable than refined sugar in many African-American households. The custard was creamy yet firm, with just enough spice to balance the richness. Served slightly warm or chilled, it was often topped with a dollop of fresh cream when available. Families prized it for how it stretched ingredients and brought comfort at the end of a meal. Though it has faded from most tables today, molasses custard pie was a testament to how skillful cooks could create memorable flavors from the simplest supplies. It remains a forgotten piece of culinary history, carrying with it the warmth of generations past. Peach-fried pies were a handheld treat that blended practicality with indulgence, making use of dried or canned peaches, sweetened and spiced before being folded into rounds of pastry. Fried in bubbling lard until crisp and golden, they emerged with flaky exteriors and soft, syrupy centers. These pies were often prepared in batches, wrapped in paper, and taken along to fields, church gatherings, or train rides, making them both portable and satisfying. The scent of cinnamon and fried dough was enough to draw children to the kitchen, eager for their share. Dried peaches, rehydrated in sweetened water, were common in cooler months when fresh fruit was scarce, ensuring the flavor of summer could be enjoyed year-round. Each bite offered a contrast between crisp edges and the tender filling, a balance that made them unforgettable. While modern kitchens lean toward baked versions, the lard-fried originals remain a disappearing treasure from the African-American kitchen. Roasted possum with sweet potatoes was once a wintertime feast in rural African-American communities, especially in the South where hunting helped supplement tight food budgets. The meat, known for its rich, gamey flavor, was cleaned, parboiled, and roasted slowly alongside halved sweet potatoes that absorbed the juices. The pairing balanced the savory intensity of the possum with the natural sweetness of the potatoes, creating a filling and deeply comforting meal. Families often gathered for these dinners after a successful hunt, turning a necessary act of survival into a communal event. The preparation was careful and deliberate, with seasoning passed down through generations. Though it might seem unusual now, this dish was a symbol of resourcefulness, ensuring nothing edible went to waste during lean months. Today, it has nearly vanished from modern menus, remembered only by those who grew up in households where wild game was part of daily life and flavor was born from the land itself. Benny seed-fried okra combined the tender bite of fresh okra with the toasty flavor of sesame seeds, which had been brought to the South through African culinary traditions. The okra pods were sliced, tossed with cornmeal, and mixed with a generous sprinkling of benny seeds before being fried in hot oil until crisp. This coating added a nutty aroma that complemented the okra's natural sweetness, creating a side dish that was as flavorful as it was satisfying. It was a common offering at family dinners, fish fries, and church gatherings, where it was served alongside other fried favorites. The dish reflected a blend of heritage and local agriculture, using ingredients that were readily available yet deeply tied to cultural history. While fried okra still appears on southern tables today, the version enriched with bena seeds has become rare, a subtle but important reminder of the African influence that shaped so much of the region's cooking. Pork crackling gravy was the ultimate comfort food for many African American households, a way to turn even the smallest scraps into something extraordinary. Rendered pork fat was cooked until the crispy bits, known as cracklings, were golden brown and bursting with flavor. Flour was stirred in to make a roux, and milk or broth was added to create a thick, savory gravy studded with the crunchy pieces. Poured generously over hot biscuits, cornbread, or rice, it transformed simple starches into a hearty meal. The combination of creamy gravy and salty cracklings offered both texture and richness, satisfying hunger without requiring expensive ingredients. It was especially popular in farming communities where hog butchering provided the cracklings as a byproduct. Over time, as diets shifted and pork rendering became less common in home kitchens, pork crackling gravy faded from everyday meals, though its memory remains a beloved piece of Southern food tradition and the art of making something from every part of the animal. Wild persimmon pudding was a fall specialty, created from fruit gathered straight from the trees when the frost had softened them to peak sweetness. The pulp, rich and almost honey-like, was blended with eggs, milk, sugar, and spices before being baked into a dense, moist pudding. Its flavor was earthy yet sweet, with a depth that only wild persimmons could provide. Many families foraged together, turning the collection of fruit into a seasonal ritual. Served warm with a drizzle of cream or a pat of butter, it was both humble and decadent. Because wild persimmons were small and labor-intensive to process, the pudding carried a sense of reward and celebration when it finally reached the table. Today, with fewer people foraging and wild persimmon trees harder to find, the dish has become rare, replaced by more accessible desserts. Yet for those who remember it, wild persimmon pudding tastes of crisp autumn air, family gatherings, and the satisfaction of living close to the land. Shrimp and grits with red-eye gravy was an early coastal dish that blended land and sea in a way that felt both rustic and refined. The grits were slow-cooked until creamy, often enriched with butter, while the shrimp were quickly sautéed and served alongside a gravy made from coffee and ham drippings. The coffee lent the sauce a smoky bitterness that balanced the sweetness of the shrimp and the richness of the grits. This version was less about heavy cream sauces and more about bold, straightforward flavors. It reflected a time when local ingredients dictated the menu, with shrimp caught fresh from nearby waters and ham smoked in home smokehouses. Served for breakfast or supper, it was a meal that offered comfort without pretension. While shrimp and grits survive in modern cuisine, the coffee-laced red-eye gravy variant has nearly disappeared, leaving behind a memory of mornings by the shore and the taste of tradition in every bite. Turnip green pot pie took the familiar concept of pot pie and gave it a southern garden twist. Chopped greens, often cooked with smoked meat for flavor, were thickened into a savory filling, then topped with a flaky crust. The greens provided a slightly bitter, earthy note that contrasted with the rich pastry, creating a dish that felt hearty yet fresh. This pie made use of an abundant crop, ensuring that nothing from the garden went to waste. It was served in cooler months when turnip greens were plentiful, often at family suppers or church gatherings. The crust, whether made from scratch or using biscuit dough, sealed in the steam and intensified the flavors. Though pot pies remain popular, the version focused on leafy greens has become rare, overshadowed by meat-heavy fillings. It stands as a reminder that vegetables once held the starring role in many dishes, celebrated for their flavor and their connection to the land and season. Ashcooked yams were one of the simplest yet most flavorful ways to prepare sweet potatoes, rooted in traditions that valued resourcefulness. Whole yams were buried directly in the warm ashes of a fireplace or outdoor pit, roasting slowly until their skins blackened and the insides turned soft and caramelized. Peeled and eaten hot, sometimes with a drizzle of molasses or a pat of butter, They required no elaborate seasoning. The method gave the yams a smoky depth that could not be replicated in a conventional oven. This was a common practice in households where open hearth cooking was still part of daily life, especially during the colder months. It was a dish that connected people to older ways of cooking, where fire and patience were essential tools. As fireplaces became decorative rather than functional, ash-cooked yams faded into memory, replaced by oven-baked versions that, while delicious, lacked the primal flavor of those pulled straight from the embers. Okra and corn macshu was a Louisiana dish that brought together African, Native American, and French influences in a colorful, flavorful mix. Fresh okra, corn, peppers, and onions were sautéed in butter or bacon drippings until tender, creating a light stew that was both sweet and savory. The okra's slight slipperiness helped thicken the dish naturally, while the corn added bursts of sweetness. Seasonings varied, but paprika, thyme, and a hint of cayenne were common, giving it a gentle heat. Served as a side or a vegetarian main, it was a celebration of summer produce at its peak. This dish thrived in communities where gardens overflowed with vegetables, and neighbors shared what they grew. Though macshu still exists, the traditional combination with okra has grown harder to find, replaced by versions that skip the vegetable entirely. It remains a testament to seasonal cooking, cultural blending, and the joy of coaxing deep flavor from fresh, simple ingredients. Molasses popcorn balls were a sticky, chewy treat often made during holidays, fairs, or school events, bringing a bit of homemade sweetness to special occasions. Freshly popped corn was poured into a large bowl, then coated with hot molasses syrup cooked until thick and fragrant. The mixture was quickly shaped into balls by hand while still warm, a task that could leave fingers covered in syrup but was worth every sticky moment. They had a rich, deep sweetness that contrasted with the light, airy popcorn, making them a satisfying bite. Often wrapped in wax paper or cellophane, they could be stored for days, making them perfect for gifting or sharing. Some families added nuts for extra crunch, while others kept them plain for pure simplicity. The flavor was unmistakable: bold molasses with a hint of smokiness, the kind that stuck to your teeth and made you smile. Though simple, molasses popcorn balls represented a time when homemade treats were part of the season's magic, each one crafted with care in kitchens filled with laughter and the sound of popcorn popping on the stove. Stewed tomatoes and rice was a humble yet deeply comforting dish that stretched the harvest into a full, satisfying meal. Fresh or canned tomatoes were stewed slowly with onions, peppers, and sometimes a bit of bacon or smoked meat for richness. Once the tomatoes had broken down into a savory, tangy sauce, they were spooned over or simmered with cooked rice, soaking every grain in flavor. It was a budget-friendly way to feed a family using ingredients often already on hand, especially in late summer when gardens overflowed. The warmth of the tomatoes balanced the softness of the rice, creating a dish that could be eaten as a main course or alongside fried fish, greens, or cornbread. It was also a favorite for those who appreciated meals that felt both filling and wholesome without being heavy. Leftovers were even better the next day, the flavors deepening as they sat. Stewed tomatoes and rice carried with it a sense of homegrown abundance, proof that even the simplest garden fare could be turned into something worth savoring. Rabbit Brunswick stew was a tangy, hearty, tomato-based stew that brought together wild game and garden vegetables in one comforting pot. Made in rural kitchens, it often started with freshly dressed rabbit, browned for flavor before being simmered in a tomato broth. Vegetables like butter beans, corn, and okra were added, creating a colorful, nutrient-packed mix. The stew had a balance of savory richness from the meat and a slight tang from the tomatoes, with just enough spice to make it lively without overpowering. It was a way to make the most of whatever was available: wild-caught rabbit in hunting season, homegrown vegetables in the summer, and preserved goods in winter. Slow cooking allowed the flavors to blend into a thick, satisfying meal that could feed many mouths. Often served with cornbread or over rice, it was as much a communal dish as it was a family staple, the kind of meal that tasted best when shared. Rabbit Brunswick stew reflected the ingenuity of cooks who knew how to transform humble resources into something memorable and deeply nourishing. Pound cake with cane syrup glaze was a dessert that carried richness in both flavor and tradition. The cake itself was dense and buttery, made by carefully creaming sugar and butter before adding eggs and flour for the classic fine crumb. Once baked, it was drizzled with a thick amber-colored glaze made from cane syrup, a sweetener with a deeper, earthier taste than refined sugar. The glaze seeped into the cake's edges, creating pockets of sticky sweetness that made each slice a treat. This dessert was often brought out for Sunday dinners, church gatherings, and holiday celebrations, where it sat proudly on the dessert table beside pies and cobblers. The cane syrup gave it a distinct flavor that felt both rustic and indulgent, a reminder of older times when sugarcane was a regional staple. Simple to make but rich in taste, pound cake with cane syrup glaze was the kind of dessert that felt like home. Solid, satisfying, and made with love that you could taste in every bite. Quail with biscuit dressing was a meal that blended the flavors of small game with the comfort of homemade bread stuffing. The quail, tender and flavorful, was often seasoned with salt, pepper, and herbs before being roasted to perfection. The biscuit dressing beneath it was made by crumbling day-old biscuits, mixing them with onions, celery, broth, and sometimes bits of sausage or smoked meat. As the quail roasted, its juices soaked into the dressing, giving it a rich, meaty depth. This dish was a special occasion meal, often prepared during hunting season or served to honored guests. Quail provided a delicate, slightly gamey flavor that paired beautifully with the soft, savory dressing. The combination of crispy skin, tender meat, and moist, flavorful stuffing made every bite memorable. While labor-intensive compared to everyday fare, it reflected the care and pride cooks put into their finest meals. Quail with biscuit dressing was not just food, it was a show of hospitality, a table centerpiece that celebrated both tradition and the bounty of the season. Pickled watermelon rind was a way of making sure nothing from the summer fruit went to waste. Once the sweet red flesh was eaten, the pale rind was peeled, sliced, and simmered in a syrup spiced with cloves, cinnamon, and sometimes ginger. After cooling, the rind transformed from bland and firm into tender, tangy sweet bites that paired perfectly with savory dishes. It was often served alongside roasted meats, adding a bright contrast to heavier flavors. Pickled rind jars lined many pantry shelves, each one a reminder of summer during the cold months. The process was a testament to resourcefulness, turning what would normally be discarded into something special. The flavor was unlike anything else, with a balance of sweetness and spice that made it stand out among other pickles. For many, it was a taste of home and tradition, evoking memories of hot days, family gatherings, and kitchens filled with the scent of simmering syrup. Pickled watermelon rind proved that with a little creativity, even scraps could become something extraordinary. Batter-fried cow tongue was a dish that turned an often overlooked cut into something crisp, flavorful, and satisfying. The tongue was simmered until tender, then cooled, peeled, and sliced into thin pieces. These slices were dipped in seasoned batter, often cornmeal-based for extra crunch, and fried until golden brown. The result was a surprising blend of crispy coating and melt-in-your-mouth meat, with a flavor rich and beefy but milder than many expected. Served hot, it could be eaten as a main dish with sides like coleslaw or potatoes, or as part of a larger spread for special occasions. While it required patience to prepare, it was a way to make full use of the animal, reflecting a nose-to-tail cooking philosophy that wasted nothing. Batter-fried cow tongue was not just about thrift, it was about taking something humble and elevating it into a meal worth savoring. For those who grew up with it, the dish was as much about family tradition as it was about flavor. Hush puppies with onion and peppers were more than just a side. They were a highlight of community fish fries and gatherings. Cornmeal batter was mixed with chopped onions and bell peppers, giving each bite a burst of sweetness and a subtle crunch. The batter was shaped into small balls or oblong fritters and fried until golden, the outside crisp and the inside soft and fluffy. Served hot alongside fried fish, They soaked up the flavors on the plate while adding their own savory charm. They were easy to make in large batches, making them perfect for feeding a crowd. Each batch disappeared quickly, with people often grabbing seconds before the plate was empty. Hush puppies with onion and peppers carried the sounds and smells of outdoor cooking, oil sizzling, laughter in the air, and plates piled high with comfort food. They were a reminder that sometimes the simplest recipes create the biggest sense of togetherness. Spiced sweet potato fritters were a warm, fragrant treat that combined the earthy sweetness of sweet potatoes with the richness of warming spices. Grated sweet potatoes were mixed with flour, eggs, and seasonings like cinnamon, nutmeg, and a hint of brown sugar, then shaped into small patties. These were pan-fried until the outside was golden and crisp, while the inside stayed soft and tender. The spices brought out the natural sweetness of the potatoes, making them a versatile dish that could be served at breakfast, as a snack, or even as a dessert with a drizzle of syrup. They were especially popular in the fall, when sweet potatoes were fresh and plentiful. The smell of them frying filled the kitchen with an inviting aroma that drew everyone in. Spiced sweet potato fritters were proof that simple seasonal ingredients could be turned into something both comforting and flavorful with just a little creativity and care. Creole oyster dressing was a luxurious holiday dish that brought together the briny richness of oysters with the comforting heartiness of bread stuffing. Chopped oysters were mixed with sautéed onions, celery, bell peppers, and Creole seasonings, then folded into a base of breadcrumbs moistened with broth. Baked until golden, the dressing had a savory depth with bursts of ocean flavor in every bite. It was often served alongside roasted meats or as part of a Thanksgiving spread, where it stood out from more traditional stuffings. The combination of spices and seafood reflected the coastal influences of Creole cooking, bringing a taste of the sea to the holiday table. Creole oyster dressing was more than just a side dish. It was a celebration of abundance, tradition, and the flavors of a place deeply connected to its waters. For many, it was a once-a-year indulgence that marked the season in the most delicious way possible. Share your favorite forgotten dish in the comments, like this video, and subscribe so we can keep serving up memories together.